So our next speaker is younger, and that's Mr. Jerry Scheller. And he's originally from Everett, and he was a freshman at the University of Washington in 1941, and he was drafted into the Army Infantry in 1943. And his birthday is July 27th, 1923.
Thank you very much.
Do you want this raised up higher?
No, I think that'll be okay. That'll be okay. Thanks to my cohorts here to precede me here. They did such a wonderful job. I'm going to try to get this into a time frame here to show you where we were. Now, I also lived here. I lived in Everett. I grew up in Everett. My father was with the Bar Association up there, and we had a very nice home on North Grand Avenue, overlooking Puget Sound. And my dad had died in July of 1941. Excuse me, it was earlier than that, about April of 1941. So I was living alone with my mother, and instead of going over to Whitman College, which my dad had kind of laid out for me before he died, and also to pledge Sigma Alpha Epsilon, SAE, which he had outlined for me, I decided to stay home. I didn't want to leave my mother. I didn't want to go over to Walla Walla and she being up here in Everett alone. Although she was a very capable woman, driving her car at age 70, and lots of friends, lots of company. So she had a lot going for her, of course, but I was trying to make it down at the university. Well, December 7, the critical day. It was, if I recall, it was a beautiful, rather warm day in Everett, and about noon of that December 7th day, my neighbor, Art Gunderson, a physician, one of the founders of the Everett Clinic, by the way, he had been out on a house call, and he came roaring back up Grand Avenue into his driveway, and he popped out of his car and he yelled at me, "Hey, Jerry, Pearl Harbor has been bombed." And I'm sure we stood there together and talked for a while before he went into his home. I went, of course, and told my mother about that. And then, if I recall, that Sunday in Everett, I don't know what happened here in Everett, or I should say Seattle, and down the coast, but we kind of blacked out. Wasn't that, it was kind of ridiculous that we would try to black out thinking the Japanese were coming up over the hill. But paranoia, I guess, it really hit us hard. We didn't know how to take that. So we found out that this was very common. This upset people, and they didn't know which way to go, and things were really tied up. Well, about 3 days later, before I went back down to the university to a class where I decided to go to school, I didn't belong to a fraternity, but I found a boarding house with some nice guys there, and I was living in Seattle, then coming up on the bus or getting a ride up to Everett on weekends to see my mother. Well, we were thinking about this at going to school, of course, and one reason here I was really concerned, I was also in ROTC, first year freshman, had to go into the ROTC. I didn't see too well, so I couldn't get into the Navy ROTC, so I went into the Army ROTC. And we had a uniform, and we had our drills and so forth, and I liked ROTC. So when Pearl Harbor came along and hit us, I thought, hey, maybe I'm going to have to leave home and do something. So the three of us got in one of our old cars that we drove and went down to the post office in Everett. They had a very large post office right downtown, and they had a recruiting officer there. And two of my buddies were invited to join the Navy right away. I also thought, hey, the Navy sounds good to me. I'm ROTC, but I can get out of that. Well, he said, Scheller, take your glasses off. Uh-oh. He said, you can't see very well, can you? I said, no, I can't. He says, buddy, you're out of here. You're out of here. So that ended that. But what really struck me hard was that here we had a war, and as Warren pointed out, Roosevelt knew this war was coming on. All these reports were out and floating about that the Japanese Navy had left Japan and their aircraft carriers and planes were heading toward Hawaii. All of these things were happening, and we at home began to wonder, well, what's happened to us? Why did we let this happen? But it did happen. But we all had to adjust to this very quickly. And I didn't find it too hard not to try to finish university, so I went back. Oh, wait a minute, I'm not ahead of myself. I went back a ways. I went back to the university, tried to get through my first year, and of course all this time my draft number was coming up. And I was drafted into the Army in early 1943. And I was very, very fortunate. I had a very good career in the Army. I was disappointed, though, one thing. I found myself qualified to go to OCS, Officer Candidate School at Fort Benning. But by the time I was sitting around Camp Roberts down in California for a while after my outfit had graduated from their basic training, that program was shut down for a while, and General Marshall came up with a program to fill the Army full of new Army engineers. And I did fall into a program which put me up at the University of San Francisco for about 6 months with the theory that in a year we'd get our gold bars and be out into service. But during that time, that program, they call it ASTP, Army Specialized Training Program, folded. General Marshall called that. They needed more troops in Europe and wherever we were going. So that program did fold. And that kind of left me out on a limb. So I was sent back to the Army, of course. I was at University of San Francisco for this training, and it was wonderful. We had an old Army colonel there running their program, and that program washed out after about a year. And there I was. But during that time, I was at ASTP. I learned quite a bit about the Catholic Church, quite a bit about San Francisco, and I think to close this out, I'm going to say one of the loveliest things that happened. One of my buddies at the University of San Francisco, there were about 200 of us there taking this program, was from St. Louis. And he said, Jerry, I have a friend here in San Francisco, and I'd like you to meet this person. And I said, okay, let's do it. So we went down to they used to have these big centers down on Market Street. What do we call them? That's it. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Army dance for soldiers and so forth. And he introduced me to a lovely blonde Marine. She was a Marine, a sergeant in the Marines. And we dated each other until that thing broke out And she had to stay in San Francisco. I had to go overseas. But I didn't want to bring the Marine Corps in here because I thought they were okay at that time. I don't normally make a speech of any kind, but I would like to say that my experiences with the servicemen that I met in the service, most of them had died, it seems, or you get out of touch with them. But this has been invaluable for me. These are wonderful, wonderful things. And it's like with J.W. here, his Air Corps experiences to me are just great. He's done a lot of things. He's covered a lot of ground, I should say. When you could be both in the English Air Force and the American Air Force, probably not too many. But it has been a great experience. And I appreciate the people associated here with the Magnuson Park group. It's been fun to talk to you, but it wasn't all that easy, although I started at home first. That was much better than being a sailor on the USS Arizona. That's all I have to say, and God bless you all.